Welcome again to the Purposes of God. This is your host, Doug Krieger of the Tribulation Network, and you will be viewing and listening to video number 7 in this special 29 series of videos on the purposes of God. In video 7, we're going to be discussing distance and time measurements from Jerusalem's Temple Mount. This is part 1. Measuring line over Jerusalem. God, as the geometer of creation, measures the Gentile world powers in their relationship to Jerusalem. In the latter years, John was given a reed like a measuring rod. Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles. And they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. He stood and measured the earth. Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 6. Now, global positioning satellites, GPS. Newton believed in a universal standard in the geometry of Solomon's temple. His thesis went like this: linear measures may relate to or equal years of the Gregorian calendar. GPS, global positioning satellite technology, allows us to precisely determine distance between 2 points, or in our case, from the Jerusalem's temple to whatever point on the earth specifically. The universal standard in the geometry of the temple in Jerusalem. Judgment will I lay to the line, and righteousness to the plummet. Isaiah 28:17. In Micah 1:2 we read, Hear, all ye people, hearken, O earth, and all that therein is, and let the Lord God be witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Jerusalem, the temple, and measuring the nations and God's people. Zechariah and John's measuring line perspective, Newton's universal standard in temple geometry, can hypothesize that linear measurement may correlate or equal to year of the Gregorian calendar, especially as it pertains to Gentile world power relationships to Jerusalem, Israel. In other words, the distance between a given city capital in the Gentile world powers and its relationship to Jerusalem can be calculated in, let's say, miles in our case, as well as year. And the heart core of that equation is, of course, the temple. The third temple. The third temple on the Temple Mount, or Har HaBayath, signals the end of days prophecies within Daniel's 2,520 days, or his 70th yet future week. The 2,300 days prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 verses 9 through 14 signals the final epic between Antichrist and the Gentile world powers versus the divine purpose in sacrifice versus desolations. Those 2,300 days of Daniel 8 verses 9 through 14 are embedded within the 20 days of the 70th week, both of which, of course, are yet future. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The link between Jesus Christ, the Ark, and the temple relates to time and distance in cosmic measurement. The temple symbolizes Christ as the origin of measure toward the nation, and his birth in 1 AD is the origin of the time to which these measurements calibrate. Sir Isaac Newton. Time is the interpreter, and the Jerusalem temple holds the key to the Gentile world powers in their relationship to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Israel. This is a map designed originally by Dr. Asher Kaufman, and affirms that the Dome of the Spirits, if you look on the map, number 28, just north of the Dome of the Rock, and it's also known as the Dome of the Tablets, is the original location of the holiest of all, where the Ark of the Covenant was located. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem and the Gentile world powers. 587 statute miles from Nippur, Babylon, to the Temple Mount. In 587 BC, the temple was destroyed by Babylon, foretold by Ezekiel while dwelling near Nippur, the religious center of Mesopotamia. Now there are 539 statute miles from Babylon, the city of Babylon, to the Temple Mount. In 539 BC, Babylon is conquered by Persia. Prisca Theologia manifests using sacred cubit of 25.20 inches. The statute mile is 5,280 feet based on the sacred cubit. And again, I want you to take a look at where Babylon is and where Nippur is on this map. As you can see, their distances are varied at this point. And by the way, today's Baghdad is north of ancient Babylon, close to where the rivers merge there, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. A line shall be stretched forth from Jerusalem. Zechariah 1:16. We have a map here that will give you the distances either in nautical miles or in statute miles from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem directly to world capitals, even to the United States, and of course throughout the Middle East. For example, in nautical miles, which is normally measured in nautical miles after the resurrection and the crucifixion of Christ, 666 nautical miles is the distance between between the Kaaba in Mecca to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. There are 1,948 nautical miles from London to the Temple Mount. 1948 AD is when Israel became a nation. Again, England no longer controlled the land of Israel under mandate from the UN and the League of Nations. Interestingly enough, in 1799, Napoleon made a very strong statement about Israel's ultimate independence and a land for the Jews. Paris to the Temple Mount, precisely 1,799 nautical miles between the two. 2520 and Gentile world power. Sir Isaac Newton, the nautical mile calibrates to prophetic events after, again, the birth of Christ. Statute mile relates to events before the birth of Christ. Again, the statute mile is 5,280 feet. The nautical mile is 6,076 feet, or 1,852 meters. Here we have a airport calculator in which they're measuring nautical miles, statute miles, and kilometers, and degrees, interestingly enough, from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, to Colorado Springs, Colorado, calculating distances in 4 different fashions here. The divine purpose through time, and God does have his perfect timing. 538 BC, Cyrus the Great, to 1948 AD, there were 2,486 years, measured in solar years of 365.2 days. Now, taking that figure of solar years of 2,486 times 365, you will get 907,390. Divide that by 360, and interestingly enough, you're going to get 2,520. 539 BC was the fall of Babylon, Neo-Babylonian Empire. 33 AD, Christ's death and resurrection. 1948 was the year of Israel's rebirth and the end of the British Mandate. Now you take that 1948 and the 539 together, and that will equal 2,487 plus 33 will give you 2,520. Judgment will I lay to the line, and righteousness to the plummet. Isaiah chapter 28, verse 17. A line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem. Zechariah chapter 1, verse 16. Here in this graphic, you can see Jerusalem and the Temple Mount juxtaposed to a number of Gentile world powers. That line has been stretched forth upon Jerusalem. In Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, it states, Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. This concludes video number 7 in our special series on the purposes of God. Again, thank you for listening and viewing, and now we're moving on to video number 8 in this special 29-part series. Thank you for, again, your attention, and again, I am your host, Doug Krieger, for this special presentation.